Okay, we're gonna start. Hello everyone, my name is Salma Hussein, my pronouns are she, her, and I am president of KCLSU as elected by you wonderful students last year. And today is our AGM, annual general meeting. I'm really looking forward to it. You're going to be able to hear everything that KCLSU has been doing this year, what we've been doing with your money, what we've actually been doing with your time and representation, how we're representing you. So I'm going to hand over. The whole purpose of this is so you can get a better understanding, and we are so open to questions. Any comments and questions are always welcome, and I hope you have a wonderful time. So I'm going to pass on to Imran and Faiza. Thank you.
Thank you, Salma. I'd like to take this as an opportunity to welcome everyone to this year's AGM. My name is Imran and I will be co-chairing this year's AGM. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll be chairing alongside Faiza. Say hello, Faiza.
Hello, my name is Faiza. My pronouns are she, her. I'll also be one of your co-chairs for this evening, and I'm a medical student here at King's.
Great, thank you, Faiza. Before we begin, I would like to take this as an opportunity to remind everyone of the KCLSU Safe Space policy. So at KCLSU, we want people to feel comfortable. This meeting is for all of our members, and we want all of our members to have the freedom to ask their questions. However, anything asked that is rude or inappropriate or might make other people feel uncomfortable will be filtered out of the Q&A box. This evening, we'll first be hearing from 3 of our 6 elected student officers on the work that they've been doing since July of last year, and there'll be an opportunity to ask them any questions you may have. We'll then move on to looking at the members' code of conduct. There'll be time again to ask questions, and we'll discuss the values and behaviours that everyone considers important for members at King's. We'll then have a short access break, before which we'll come back for our remaining 3 student officers and their reports. And again, there'll be an opportunity to ask them any questions you may have. We'll then have the opportunity to hear about the motion proposals that have been submitted to go to the NUS National Conference, as you can see on your screen. And then we'll finally receive the trustees' annual report and accounts. And again, you'll have the opportunity to ask the panel any questions you may have. And then, of course, finally, we'll close the AGM. Just to give you a quick outline of how voting is going to work at this year's digital AGM. So voting is now open online and it will close in 48 hours, so at 5 p.m. this Friday. We'd really urge you to head over to the KCLSU website to vote on approving the minutes from last year's AGM, as well as approving the audit selection process, and to vote on which motion should be submitted to the NUS National Conference. We'll hear more about the NUS motion proposals later on this evening. I'd also like to provide a quick disclaimer that this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available online on our AGM voting page, so any members who aren't able to attend the meeting tonight can watch it back and can make an informed decision when they go to vote. I'd also like to provide a quick disclaimer on the Q&A. So throughout the meeting, we'll be asking for your thoughts and questions via the Teams Q&A function. But please note that although we'd absolutely love to go through every single question and comment sent in, we only have a limited period of time for each section. So we may not be able to respond to everything that comes in. We will, however, be pulling together all of the unanswered questions and comments, and we'll compile them into a document with detailed written responses, which will be uploaded to the AGM Hub on the KCLSU website. Now, as we mentioned, KCLSU is led by 6 full-time elected student officers. This year they are Salma, Niall, Vatsav, Alice, Hina and Tasnia, and they were elected to represent your views to the university and make sure your student experience at King's is the best possible. Now, they've been in office since July of last year, and we'll now have the opportunity to hear from 3 of our elected student officers, Salma, Niall and Fatsav. Now, whilst you're hearing reports from our officers, we'd really urge you to send in your questions via the Q&A function on Teams.
So what did I do in term one? I worked on a number of projects ranging from starting Mousewatch. I worked on a number of COVID-related matters, such as securing fit-to-fly tests for international students, securing menstrual products for students in residences who are self-isolating, working on improving financial literacy through different media. What do I hope to achieve in term two? I want to do more community building events so that students feel like they are more part of the wider KCLSU community. Currently, I'm working on the safety net, which should hopefully be released by the time you are watching this video. I'm also looking at doing a series on female empowerment to make all self-identifying women realise their immense value.
My biggest achievement in term one has to be the Protect Our Wednesday Afternoons campaign, which successfully reinstated protected time for students. In term two, I hope to finalise both my accessibility fund and wellbeing need priorities. I also want to start work on my third objective, engaging with student media groups and establishing how we can support them going forwards. I'll also be working with the other officers to continue to push for the best for students throughout the rest of this year. The best ways for students to get involved would be responding to surveys. They're crucial for us to collect information and evidence to support what we're working on. You can also get in touch with me directly by tweeting at KCLSU_VPAD or emailing vpad@kclsu.org.
It's great to hear about all of the brilliant work which Salma and Niall have been doing this year. We'll now hear an oral report from Fatsav.
Thank you, Imran. So far in the 7 months that I've been in office, I've mainly been working on assessments. This has involved sitting at various college committees and representing student users in assessments, and also advocating for assessment policy changes through student voice, most notably by implementing the late submission policy amendment and finally scrapping the cap. Moving into term two, I'm looking forward to working on financial transparency and making college governance more transparent for all students.
Great, thank you for that, Fatsav. So we've had a number of different questions from students come in, and I'll now put those to our student officers. So I have a question here for Salma regarding student refunds. So a student's asking, is there anything being done about student refunds for fees this year, particularly for courses which have a practical element?
So great question. Tuition fees is a national issue. It's not something which is limited to students at King's. So I'm not laughing at tuition fee refunds. I'm laughing about the fact that my officers like to out me. But tuition fee refunds are something which are a national problem, and it's something which needs to be resolved nationally. The government needs to fund this. We have written a full response to this question because I thought it was important to give a thorough response, and just I don't want to be time limited and give a lower quality one. But essentially, we are working on national campaigns. Work on national campaigns and joining forces with other unions rather than pressuring our university in particular. We've looked at their finances and it's not viable for them to give refunds. I don't think if they were to give refunds, that would lead to mass redundancies of staff, and if that leads these people are terrible, mass redundancies of staff, and that is not good for anyone, neither students nor staff. So therefore we are working on it. So the shortened version is national campaign. Kings aren't going to give us a tuition fee refund. We have been raising it since August, September, and it has become apparent to us that that is not the option that is going to get us a refund. What will get us a refund most likely is governmental pressure. So that is something we're looking forward to working on. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Salma. It's great to see you're having so much fun. So I have a question from a student specifically for Niall. The student's asking, what have you done to help support student well-being in sports and societies given the COVID-19 pandemic?
So one of my main objectives going into this year that became even more crucial after obviously the pandemic hit was developing the wellbeing lead role within societies. So that's something I've been working on this year with our wellbeing team. And then going forward, when the pandemic hit, we also started developing support for our groups on how they could deliver their events online to continue that King's community, given that we had to move most of the things digitally.
Great, thank you, Niall. I have now a question for our VP Education, Arts and Sciences, so VATSAV. A student's asking, in light of the petition to reduce the tuition fee rates for UK students, what is the current situation for overseas students looking like? Will KCL be refunding tuition for programs that went entirely online?
Yeah, this is part of our wider financial transparency and tuition fee refund campaign. If we look at a close look at university finances, it's pretty evident that universities profit-making machine. They sort of go year on year. So it's universities don't have the financial capacity for tuition fee refunds. So it all sort of leads into a national campaign and the government sort of putting their efforts together to answer students' concerns and queries. That said, it is important for us as a union to push university to do the most that they can for our students. Previously, they stopped the 5% increase for international students year on year in their tuition fees, and this is something we're looking to replicate this year.
Great, thank you. I have one more question for Salma. A student's asking whether we can start a petition to have first year module grades count towards their degrees. And this particular student is proposing for it to be optional to opt in final year to improve students' chances of graduating. And student considers that given the current situation, that this would be a plausible option for King's to implement.
So the thing about the first years is it was something that was discussed at academic board, what they're going to do with. So from essentially year 21-22 academic year, they're going to make it so that first year does not count at all. That's something that has been passed by the highest academic decision-making body of King's. So that is something that was moving forward anyway, because this brings us closer to the sector where other universities don't do that, because first year is a learning curve. That is definitely something you can think about, and I would encourage you to contact the education officers on, because that is something they can work on and bring to academic board as a proposal. We had extensive discussions about the fair assessment policy and perhaps working on maybe that could be a mitigation which they could consider and put towards King's. I know Alice is working very hard on fair assessment policy, so you could contact her on vpeh@kclsu.org. And I don't want you to think that I'm passing the blame. It's really not that. It's more because she is closer to the work on it. But thank you for the question.
Great, thank you for your detailed response, Salma. I have a question for Niall, so our VP for Activities and Development. What is the biggest achievement you've had over the past 6 months in your role?
So as I mentioned in my little video, I would say my biggest achievement in first term and the first sort of half of my year was reinstating the protection for Wednesday afternoons. I know from my experience and from the feedback we have from students how valuable that free time on a Wednesday afternoon is, even just to decompress and chill out and look after your well-being. So for me, it was a really big achievement that we successfully campaigned to get that reinstated going into term 2.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we've heard from many students about how much they appreciate having protected Wednesday afternoons being reinstated. We're now going to move on to looking at, in some respects, the showpiece event of this year's AGM, which is the Members' Code of Conduct. So the essential objective of the proposed Code of Conduct should be to make it clear to all King's students that a condition of membership of the union is to observe and follow the policies and procedures agreed by our student-led union. Now, in turn, the union will make it clear in the code the values, behaviours and services that are expected of KCLSU in support of its members. Now, the code will be an overarching agreement between members and the union from which all of the existing policies and procedures will follow. Now, we would like to take this as an opportunity to invite you all to propose values and behaviours that you, as students, expect to see within our King's community. When taking part in this, please bear in mind that all of the words you submit will be part of creating the Code of Conduct, so we'd really appreciate no silly word submissions. So to take part, please head over to slido.com and type in the code 77333 to take part. So if you head over to Slido, you'll see that when you type in the code 77333, we're first asking you all to suggest values and behaviours appropriate for members of a student union. This could include various different values, including personal safety. It could cover happiness, the opportunity to thrive, success, being treated with dignity and respect, as well as treating others with dignity and respect, tolerance, and many other things. So we'll just give you an opportunity to submit your answers and let us know the values and behaviours which you believe are appropriate for our students' union. Just to let you all know, we're having some slight technical issues, but you will all have the opportunity to let us know of the of any values and behaviours which you'd like to contribute and submit. And indeed, we already have a few from discussing with students already. And just in a moment, we'll be able to you'll be able to ask any questions that you may have to our student officers. Thank you. just to let you all know that we are receiving your submissions, and just in a couple of minutes we'll go on and discuss through them. Whilst you're waiting, we'd suggest that you start to think of any values that you think represent students' responsibilities to society and the wider community. So it may all be things such as being future leaders and role models. And then you can make a list of those, and just in a moment we'll be able to submit those values and have a discussion about them. Thank you. Okay, great. So here we have a number of different values and behaviours which you've all suggested are appropriate for our students' union. So we can see some really important things here, such as adaptability, respect, being open, happiness is one that we've heard quite a lot as well, free speech, tolerance, openness. It's great to see officer accountability on there. That's something that we've really been pushing for over the past year, and indeed you'll have plenty more opportunities to ask any questions to our officers. We can also see openness to new ideas, which again is been something that King's has really tried hard to promote over the past few years. So now, as we said, we'd like to go over to our second question. We're really keen to hear from you all about any values that you believe represent students' responsibilities to society and the wider community. So as I mentioned, these could include being future leaders, being role models, working to benefit and improve our wider society, as well as more topical issues such as working towards environmental sustainability in the context of climate change, as well as respecting the right to freedom of expression. So we'll just give you a minute or so to submit your ideas in relation to that question. Thank you. It's great to see so many of you engaging with this particular poll. We have some really interesting ideas coming through, things such as net zero carbon emissions. So perhaps students are suggesting that the union and indeed the broader university should be aiming towards that. We have broader aims, broader values such as contributing towards making the world a better place and giving back to community. Indeed, this all seems to tie in really nicely with King's vision in terms of contributing to learning, to research, and to service to society more broadly. There's also quite a few students have entered as a response equality, treating others around us more equally, as well as respecting others and our rights and indeed our responsibilities. So it's great to see so many different values being suggested here. We really appreciate your participation in this. There've been some really interesting and great feedback there. We'd now like to give you all some time to ask any questions or comments you may have on the Code of Conduct. So you can submit any questions you may have in the Q&A, and just in a moment I'll put those questions to Salma, Caroline, and Dennis. Okay, I have a question here for Salma. Someone's asking why are we having these set of rules imposed on us? They're saying that this is not what they would expect of a union which is there to support its students.
I think this is quite a fair suggestion. However, I think it's important to know. Oh, am I unmuted? It says am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, fine.
Yeah,
it said that I am
Thank you.
muted. Okay, great. So in terms of this question, I think it's a really important question. Why are we imposing rules on you? But I think it's important to realise this is not to impose rules on you to. We're not the university. We're not going to give you lots of rules that you have to follow. This is to protect you, to protect every student, because we have a KCLSU has a responsibility to you, but members also have a responsibility to respect each other. And what does that mean? What does it mean to show it respect to each other? Does it mean respect in terms of opinion or thought? But then where do you draw the line of? There's been a lot of things in the media recently about free speech and student unions, and it's important to recognise the fact that both these things, free speech and respecting each other, are two interlinked issues but are equally important. And it's important for us to, as a union, to represent all students so they feel that we are a safe place for them, but also that they have a responsibility to work together with each other. Things like being accountable. We need to be held accountable to our students, but our students also need to be held accountable of what is an acceptable standard of behaviour. We will always do what's best for the student, but what does that actually mean? I think.
Great, thank you, Salma. I now have a question which any of you, so Salma, Caroline, Dennis, whoever wishes to take it can take this question. A number of students are wondering what if they don't agree with the rules in place? Perhaps Salma could take this question again.
So we want this members code of conduct. So it's in the charity commission that we need to have this members code of conduct. It's not a matter of if we're going to have this, it's what code of conduct we're going to have. And we want increased student involvement and engagement, consultation with this code of conduct, so it can be representative of what students want. You may disagree, it's in our articles of association, and you may disagree now with what it wants, but that it gives even more reason for you to be involved in the creation of code of conduct. That way your voice can be heard, and it is something that you think reflects the needs of our members, which are students. We are here to represent the students, so if you want to be involved and you want it to reflect you, then that's what you should do.
Okay, great. Thank you, Salma. And I have a question which maybe Dennis can give. Maybe you can introduce himself and also take this question. A student's asking, what would happen if someone would violate this particular code of conduct?
Thank you for that, Imran. And just to introduce myself, my name is Dennis Shuka and I'm the Chief Exec of the Students' Union, and my pronouns are he and him. So, like, the Code of Conduct, as Salma quite rightly placed it, is an agreement on set behaviours and conducts that everyone needs to adhere to. And it's a two-way process. It's a process that the union goes by, and it's also an expectation that we ask of our members to abide by. And if people break the code of conduct, we've got processes in places to actually call them up. So if there's been areas where they've actually breached membership elements of it, they will go through a process of disciplinary. And then we'll go through a process on that part. And as I said, that element is for us to pull up the students if they breach that. But equally at the same time, we are also held accountable by our ability to adhere to those processes. So it's not just a one-way streak where we'll look to actually challenge people that don't adhere to our code of conduct, but equally at the same time, our students can also hold us to account on our compliance of the processes. So it's a two-part process.
Great, thank you for that detailed response, Dennis. I now have quite an important question from students who are asking, what will breaking this code of practice actually mean? So sort of concretely, could they, for sake of argument, could they be thrown out of the union? Any of you can feel free to take it, Dennis, Salma, or yeah.
I'll come in on this one. Like the obviously the sanctions that we have, like with it for breaking the code of conduct, like differs, and it ranges from like caution, right, or warning, to partial removal of membership to full removal of membership. So it depends to the extent they break the code of conduct. Right. So the worst case scenario situation could be where somebody's permanently excluded from being a member of the students' union. And what does that mean? That means that you won't have right and access to the National Union of Students. For you to do so, you need to be a member of the union. Secondly, you won't be in a position to run in our elections. Right. But nevertheless, although you have your membership removed, one area of support that we've always continued to provide to our students is in terms of advice advocacy. So you possibly retain that one key element of it, but other than that, you lose all the ability of a full member, which is elections, NUS, and becoming a member of our clubs and societies, as well as entering our activities and events.
Great, thank you. Salma, would you like to add anything in relation to that?
Yes, thank you, Imran. I just wanted to say that the disciplinary procedures is quite a robust one. We have a complaints procedure where it officially goes to complaints mailbox, complaints@kclsu.org, and it is investigated. There is a full investigation just to ensure that if anyone thinks that they're going to be reported and for something that is completely untrue, it is investigated. It's not just taken upon word. And then the recommendations go to the KCLSU president, who will approve a course of action. So it's not just a unaccountable process. There is transparency throughout it, and it does ensure that the best outcome is reached for members.
Great, thank you, Salma. We have another student who's mentioning that from their experience, the KCLSU complaint processes are actually quite slow and not particularly transparent in their view as things stand. So this is an open question for any of you. How will this members' code of conduct seek to improve that?
Should I
think, look, where like we aim to adhere to a time frame within our disciplinary process, right? And that time frame is there for us to make sure that we can deal with the volume of the cases, as well as set some best practice. If that time frame isn't adhered to, and there's reasons that are typically provided for that, but if there's any excessive delays in that, people can definitely have recourse to actually highlighting their concerns in terms of that process. At the same time, we have to make sure that we understand the resource that we actually put behind the complaints process. At this moment, we're looking at it. We've got a staff member that oversees that, but we are looking at seeing how we can improve that by providing that area of element of resources needed to address that level of complaint. So to answer that question, when you say that the system is slow, I think more so than the system being slow, the bigger issue and the bigger question is, are we meeting the standards that we set in terms of our time frame, right? And that time frame is set in terms of the resources. Although we might turn around and say that we're going to give X amount of days before we hear back, we obviously want to do it quicker. And I think with the complaints area of it, this is something that we realise is important, and we're trying to actually review how quick we can get back to that. But more importantly, as I said, I think when we look at this element of being slow, we just have to be very clear regarding the timeframes that we set within our disciplinary processes for us to get back to. And that timeframe is actually set on our ability to actually work with the resources that we currently have. And if people aren't satisfied with that, they're more than welcome to actually raise those as a complaint against the union, and that's something that we can look into.
Great, thank you, Dennis. I have a question for Salma now, and this is quite a topical question given what's going on in the world right now. So the student's asking, how can this Members' Code of Conduct, and indeed more broadly the Students' Union, help to stop bullying on social media?
Oh, so this is an interesting question. I think freedom of expression on social media is something which is controversial, and I think it's important to remember that there's a difference between freedom of speech and harassment, and this goes for harassment and bullying, and this goes for both staff and students. There have been cases historically of digital harassment, and this is something that we are looking at tackling. Hina, VP Postgrad, is going to be looking at digital harassment during her in an upcoming campaign, which I believe is in the last few weeks of February, which I think will show some of the ways that harassment can manifest digitally. In terms of the Members' Code of Conduct, if it was upon student consultation, we found that this was something that we needed to include. That is quite important. And then it would go, when it's implemented, it would also be through the complaints process, that if someone wanted to complain of digital harassment, that is the avenue to explore, unless it's under elections harassment, which would then go through a separate procedure. But I think that together, by making this code, it does show that members are expected to adhere to a standard of conduct, and it shows that we are serious about this. It is important to us that students need to be protected in whichever way possible.
Great, thank you, Salma. I have a question now that maybe Caroline can take. So perhaps you could introduce yourself and then take a very important question indeed. Some students have really been concerned regarding their right to free speech, and are asking whether this code restricts that freedom. Maybe perhaps Dennis or Salma could take this particular question regarding the right to free speech and whether this code restricts that freedom.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question, like freedom of speech, right? No, I'll say one of the key things that we have to really understand is that there is a definition of freedom of speech versus the ability to actually incite hatred. Right, and I think for us, it's being extremely clear on what the differences of those points are. Our code of conduct has been set up in a way that we can ensure that we allow people to be in a position to express themselves, but in a way without actually like preaching hatred, right? Because that's something that we as an organisation stand against, right? And therefore, the policy in itself would not be in a position to deter away from freedom of speech, in the sense that it doesn't actually cause harm, or doesn't actually create or incite hatred. And I think that's that key difference there. We have a robust process in place in terms of our external speakers policies that we utilise in order to actually remove those types of opportunities for people to come onto our campus to speak negatively and cause that level of hatred. But nevertheless, it is a very difficult task to do. There's a balancing act that we have to get right, and we continuously look at the way that we evaluate our speakers, having those open conversations with the university on these matters as well. So I wouldn't say that they hamper freedom of speech. I would say that they actually support it. But at the same time, I think what's really important for people to distinguish is, where does freedom of speech end and where does like the ability to spread hatred starts? And I think that's a very important point for us to actually distinguish and note.
Great, thank you for that detailed response, Dennis. Perhaps Salma, do you want to add anything in relation to the importance of free speech and how this code interacts with that freedom?
Yes, I think freedom of speech has always been a bit of a tricky situation. Recently, we went to the commemoration oration held by King's College London, where the former chair for the Office for Students, Michael Barber, was talking about the fact that students' unions and students are perhaps becoming a bit too sensitive. And there is, if you do have a freedom to express yourself, but that does not mean you have a freedom to hurt someone. Every person's own being hurt by someone is your right to talk doesn't outweigh your right to hurt someone else. And it's really important to balance those two things, because you don't want someone else to get hurt, emotionally hurt, by some of the things you can say, which people can do intentionally, unintentionally, through microaggressions. Freedom of speech is something so important to us, and it is, when we will be enforcing this code of conduct, we will be considering the aspect of freedom of speech alongside the ability for people to not feel offended, because it is something that is important, and it is quite topical with a number of documents which are coming through at the moment.
Great, thank you for that contribution, Salma. One thing which has come up as a theme through underlying a number of these questions is the fact that right now King's, of course, has something of a blended teaching approach, some online, mostly online right now, with some face-to-face for certain programs. So how, coming back to this issue of respect, which came up in our Slido poll, as well as the issue of bullying and social media, how is this code going to help in respect of online teaching, depending on how much longer online teaching will persist in the current circumstances? Dennis, would you like to start with that question?
I think, look, to answer that question, I would say that this actually transcends the code. Like, the code in itself is there for us to make sure that we support our students. We've also got our charitable objectives, one of which is for us to be the voice of our students when we speak to the university. I think that's the first point of our charitable objectives, right? But what's more important than making sure that this is factored within our code of conduct is just to understand what our strategy is. And our strategy has clearly put representation as one of our core objectives. So making sure that we interact with our students and that we present that their views and voices back to the university is something that's really important. In terms of the online learning, blended learning, from having the ability and the privilege to actually work alongside our sabbatical officers, all of whom have been working very tirelessly, very hard to make sure that the views of the students are represented in light of the online learning versus blended learning. We've got data, we've got information that clearly depicts that our students want to make sure that they have that ability not to compromise their learning experience and ensure that they have that face-to-face learning experience. And that's the area that they've been pushing. But nevertheless, they have been challenged by certain circumstances outside of their control as well as the control of the university. Which is the restriction that's been imposed by the government and the way that the universities have been asked to interpret that. So to answer your question, the way that the code of conduct works on this is by making sure that it provides a value and a platform by which we would make sure and continue to make sure that we represent the views of the students via elected officer teams. But areas such as representation and what that means to us is picked up by a variety of different methods. And I think the most significant one of that is our strategy, where we've clearly depicted representation as being one of the core aims of the organisation.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you both, Dennis and Salma, for answering these really important questions. We're now coming up to the end of our time to discuss the members' code of conduct. So the team will look into all of these brilliant suggestions for values which you've made, and we hope to incorporate these into our design for the cover of the code. Now that will be an electronic version which you'll be able to easily access on our website once finished. In terms of next steps, our office and staff team will pull together all of the different content. They'll then consult with our student networks, so our liberation networks, union development committees, and academic associations before asking our student-led board of trustees to approve the code. We aim to then release it for all of our members, and hopefully we'll have it ready for our new group of members joining us in the new academic year. Now, we have an opportunity to take a 5-minute access break. So take the opportunity to stretch your legs, get a coffee, do whatever you need to do, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes, at which point I'll hand over to my co-chair, Faiza. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back from the break, everyone, and thank you for staying with us. We'll now be hearing from our 3 remaining student officers, Aless, who is our VP for Education, specifically Health, Ina, who is our VP for Postgraduate Students, and Tasnia, who is our VP for Welfare and Community. Whilst hearing from our officers, please send in any questions you might have via the Q&A function on Teams. And now we'll just head over to the officers' reports.
Student representation is such a key focus of mine, and it's something that we'll be looking to get Kings to agree to on the 27th of January at College Education Committee, and that will be objective 1 of mine ticked off. Going forwards, I'll be looking to continue to work on student voice by creating a student experience committee at the health faculties and looking to the academic associations to get students involved in those, as well as focusing on the safety net campaign and making sure that students get a fair deal when it comes to their assessments and grades. Other than that, I have been looking at creative projects to think how we can all connect with each other in this very weird time. Follow us on Instagram at KCLSU officers and you might just get a creative treat.
I've been looking at inclusive education with different departments and faculties. I've managed to connect with lots of students and staff, looking at how we can improve this. I'm part of a number of working groups that look at mental health and wellbeing and how we can improve support for students. In term 2, I hope to have a more comprehensive understanding of decolonise at Kings and how students and staff can get involved in this framework. I also hope to work more looking at welfare support on a faculty scale. Some of our objectives include women's empowerment, looking at kind of financial aid during this time, digital data and inclusivity. I also hope to ensure that students feel supported and heard during this time. And inclusivity, I also hope to ensure that students feel supported.
Okay, so now we're going to hear an oral report from Hina, who is our VP for Postgraduate Education.
So in term 1, I have been actively working alongside the King's Careers Department on improving PGT resources for careers and employability, trying to improve PG engagement with the SU by organizing various different online events, and also been working on financial feasibility for our students with Tasnia and Salma. For term 2, I'm currently working on tackling harassment within KCLSU and King's spaces, as well as digital harassment.
Thank you so much for all those brilliant reports. Now we're going to start by asking some questions. So first I'm going to go to Aless, who is our VP for Education, specifically Health. Aless, what is being done about a potential no detriment policy for exams?
That's a great question. Hi, my name's Alice. My pronouns are she, her, just as a reminder. We'll release this as part of the full statement that we'll release after the AGM, but essentially, following the publication of the fair assessment policy, we feel that not enough meaningful student representation has been included into this policy, and also that following the policy's release, there's been a lot of confusion and concern about what it really means. So we're running a education-based campaign to really understand what you would like to see in the no detriment policy and what the current policy contains. You can find out more information about that by going to kclsu.org and searching KCL Forgotten Students and looking for the no detriment type form link on there, and you'll be able to share your thoughts.
Thank you for giving such a detailed response in such a short period of time. And now we're going to go on to Hina, who is our VP for Postgraduate Education. Someone is wondering, what are our rights if you feel that your module was not appropriately delivered? This student felt that they weren't supported and that they did not receive the required learning that they paid for. They're also asking, would they be able to put in a complaint? And if so, how would they do this? So two-part question.
Sorry. I would direct the student to the KCLSU advice service, which can be used by all students in any times of difficulties. They provide free, confidential, and impartial academic advice to students with issues affecting their studies. So you can go on the website, which is kclsu.org, and there's lots of information on how to sort of fill in the advice form and get help with the required question.
Thanks for the response, Fiona. And finally, we're going to go on to Tasnia, who is our VP for Welfare and Community. Tasnia, What sort of improvements are looking to be made for inclusive education within different departments and faculties? Over to you.
This is a really great question. It's something that I've been working on throughout the year, and I think departments are doing a really great job on doing it on a really independent scale. So different departments are doing it really well, separately. But I think one thing that needs to be done is consistently across the board, the college should implement kind of consistent change. So all departments are aware of what kind of change they want to implement. This can kind of include, I don't know if any of you guys are inclusive student education partners, but they've been doing a lot of work with attainment gaps and kind of looking at reading lists and making them less kind of Eurocentric and white, and also kind of broadening out what students are aware of with cultural competency as well.
Great response, thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to our next section, which is the NUS motion proposals.
Student representation is such a key.
Thank you. So these are the NUS motion proposals. These are the motions that students have submitted to for KCLSU to send to the NUS National Conference. The motion that receives the most votes and passes will go through a further vote process with NUS delegates from across the nation. The final 8 policies voted in by NUS delegates will be discussed at the NUS National Conference. This national conference involves students coming together from across the UK to decide on national policy and campaigns. It will be discussed and debated at NUS conference, and if it passes there, it becomes NUS policy, but it does not become KCLSU policy, important to note. So the first motion has been proposed by Dominic on fee reimbursements. The proposal states the issue facing students doing practical courses is that their education is disturbed as they can't carry out their studying online. It's important that this issue is raised as much as possible so it can reach the upper parts of government. Students who would receive some form of reimbursement would probably be happy and keen on continuing their studies. The second motion has been proposed by ML on fee reimbursement. The proposal states the most crucial issue at this time faced by the students is their inability to return to campus, and yet they must pay the full amount of fee despite not being able to utilise the fee in complete form. Hence, reduction of tuition fee or some rebate or refund is what the students would like to request and advocate for. This issue is crucial to the movement to do justice to the finances of students. Having this issue solved, discussed, and fee rebates or reductions granted in tuition fees would help students with financial problems, as well as upholding the integrity and reputation of King's College London. Now on to our third motion, which has been proposed by Ayosaf Karafortias on a healthier academic environment for postgraduate students. The proposal states, bullying supervisor instead of a mentor. Many students face supervisors abusing their power who treat them with disrespect, offending them on a daily basis via direct or indirect ways, and speak to them in a condescending way. There is a deep-rooted old culture that supervisors are like gods, and in order to get their postgraduate educations completed, the student just has to silently obey any weird behaviour by the supervisor. It is crucial that this is addressed as many students face unnecessary stress, and it's really unfortunate because they fear that even if they disclose anything or they complain, they will face the rage and revenge of a supervisor and their career will be ruined forever. This student has proposed the solution would be to break this deep-rooted notion by encouraging and giving access to students to have a voice and creating an independent third-party support in between the two parties, following them throughout their cooperation. Campaigns and lectures against fear of disclosing the truth and securing that if someone speaks freely, they won't face any negative feedback. A healthier academic environment dedicated to respecting each other's efforts, backgrounds, and individuality would make science and humanity evolve towards a brighter future. Now we go on to our fourth and final motion. This fourth motion has been proposed by Salma Hussain for a hardship funding from the government in light of COVID-19 for all students. This possibly might be, I'm not sure if it's the same Salma Hussain who's president. So, the proposal states, COVID-19 has affected all studies. Therefore, the government needs to support all students by putting money back into the pockets of students now. It is current Salma who's president. Every student has been affected by COVID-19, whether through family death, lockdown-induced loneliness, loss of income, or through any number of matters. We want the NUS to lobby the government to provide a non-means tested bursary for all students, both home and international, affected by COVID-19. This is important to NUS as a national movement, as this issue affects every student, and no one has been untouched by COVID-19. Students have been forgotten by the government throughout the pandemic, therefore it's important to ensure money is put into the pockets of every student now. Tuition fee refunds or rebates on an individual university level is ineffective due to the impact of increasing reliance on international student tuition fees to subsidise other courses, and therefore, without government support to every institution, this would lead to mass redundancies. Furthermore, the complexities of higher education sector funding means that practically refunds and rebates would not help those that are studying right now. Consequently, this motion helps those who have been disadvantaged now. The solution would be a blanket amount of money given to each student in a non-means tested manner. The announcement on the 2nd of February from the Office of Students identifying a further £50 million of hardship funds equates to £45 per student in England. This is not enough to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 on students who have lost the opportunity to work to financially support their studies. The impact of a blanket bursary to every student would allow them to afford essentials which they can't afford at the moment, highlighted recently by the plight of international students using food banks. An equitable distribution of funding to every student will help all students, irrespective of background. This would alleviate some of the financial pressures students are facing in light of the pandemic, so would have a positive impact on mental well-being of students. Furthermore, government restrictions have prevented students from having a normal student experience. This year, therefore, this financial aid would support students in a difficult year as the pandemic has become endemic due to the lasting impacts of COVID-19 on our lives and livelihoods. Thank you for listening to these 4 motions. To vote on these motions, head over to the KCLSU website by 5 p.m. this Friday. So you have until 5 p.m. this Friday to vote. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our trustee annual report and accounts. So this is the money bit. Part of the reason for holding these meetings each year is for you, the members of the union, to see how KCLSU is spending its money on making sure you get the best possible student experience during your time at King's. In a moment, I'll be introducing our panel, who will be responsible for answering questions on the trustee annual report and accounts. Whilst I do this, please send in any questions that you have on the trustee annual reports and accounts. Okay, now on to our board. For those of you who aren't familiar with the trustee board, KCLSU is a registered charity, registered as part of the Charity Commission. And so our trustee board has overall responsibility for the legal, strategic and financial health of the union. The trustee board is the decision maker of the Students' Union and is the ultimate decision-making body of the Students' Union. Our trustee board is made up of 6 student officers. They lead the KCLSU and are elected to their positions by KCL students. The student officers lead KCLSU as an organisation, drive what we campaign for, and lobby at a college and national level to make changes in the interest of the student body. Secondly, we have 4 elected student trustees. These are elected again by the KCLSU students. And thirdly, we have 4 lay trustees. These are external people recruited for their expertise in a specific area and often stay on longer than officers and student trustees. We understand that COVID has cast such a shadow over the year. We have lots of successes, but despite this, we have lots of successes to celebrate together. So let's take a look at some of the things KCLSU has done in the academic year 2019-20. And this just includes the first 5 months of our lives under the virus. Firstly, our advice and support service has supported over 1,300 students. Over 136 students have been employed as student staff, putting over £1 million back into student pockets. We have held our first ever digital awards ceremony with 5,500 students attending. We held over 150 student-led fundraising events, helping you to raise over £60,000 for charity. So that's quite a lot. But sadly, in March, all of our KCLSU bars, cafes, hubs, and the KCLSU offices in Bush House came under government restrictions and had to close. We set up an emergency group to respond to the restrictions, and our officer team focused on how best to support students through the pandemic. But during the academic year 2019-20, we achieved a income growth of 14%. That gave a total income of £9.8 million. The majority of this came from King's in the form of a grant. This year, KCLSU have had to account for a historic pension deficit of £355,000. While this is reported as a net loss, it is a one-off accounting adjustment, and KCLSU has plans in place to pay off this deficit over the next 14 years. Without this accounting deficit, we achieved a surplus, more income than expenditure, of £19,000. And this slide shows you where the money is spent by KCLSU. So firstly, we have our hubs, which is such a major point of contact for students at our campuses. Second, the support we provide our sports clubs. Thirdly, our community development initiatives, which includes 36 educational, celebratory, collaborative Liberation Month events, including hosting 15 collaborative Black History Month events. Fourth, we have supporting our democratic elections with over 6,500 students taking part in elections this year and spring elections coming up soon. Number 5, our support for our student networks and societies. And ultimately, the all-important transition to providing our services and experiences for students in the online world, especially during the time of COVID. We have over 1,100 online events that were promoted via our website and social media platforms to students. And finally, our academic advice and student wellbeing support, to name but a few. If you are able to, do take a moment to visit the annual report on the KCLSU website to take a look at what has been delivered during the academic year 2019-2020. So all in all, our total spend for this year was just over £4 billion. Okay. So that has given us a whistle-stop tour of finances for this year. We have our panel here, which includes the KCLSU's Chief Executive, Dennis, our Head of Finance, Zhao Li, as well as Salma, our President. In addition to that, we have Vatsav, our VP for Health, specifically Arts and Education, and they will be happy to answer any questions you have on this year's financial reports. I know we had one question come in earlier. I think Vatsav is going to answer it, so I'll just summarize the question for him. So this question is with regards to KCL's current finances and tuition fee refunds. They're asking, will the information on KCL's current finances and specifically how the current financial situation is not conducive to tuition fees be published for us to read, or is it already published? In addition, in general, it would be great to be able to understand the finances of King's overall in respect to tuition fees or not. So I suppose it's a two-part question.
Thanks for that, Faiza. Firstly, I'd say that in this coming term, I am going to be working on a financial transparency piece, so that would answer the latter part of the question, which is, getting more transparency and more understanding of college finances, which is particularly important. But to start off, so KCL collect in the academic year 2019 to 2020, KCL collected roughly £450 million in tuition fees. And this forms roughly half of their net income. Their net income for the year was roughly £900 million, and their net expenditure is £800 million, give or take. And all of this information is available on the college's financial annual reports, which they are obligated to publish year on year, all of which is available on their website. And we'll link all of that in a moment. So as I was saying earlier, 50% of their revenue comes from tuition fees, and they have, college spend roughly as much as they make. They're not a for-profit institution. They're completely non-profit, so they spend everything they make. The little amounts that they do save year on year gets added to their piggy bank, which is a discussion for another time. But if we look at college spendings, this is again, listed on their annual report. Roughly 60% of college expenditure is in the form of staff salaries, staff pensions, and all of those things. 10% is in financial expenses, and the remaining 30% is miscellaneous expenses for campus operations and interdepartmental operations and faculty operations. So on the whole, majority of the money that college spends from our tuition fees goes in staff salaries. And because this money goes in staff salaries, there's no money that is being saved or that's being kept for a rainy day in a piggy bank that can be returned to students. The money is spent as soon as it is deposited in colleges' bank accounts. So there is a certain inequality of bargaining power that we as an SU or students or even the university have when it comes to conversations about tuition fee refunds, which is why we need to look to a national scale and a national agenda with the NUS and with all other unions in the UK government and their spending in education and the way in which they can then get in touch with universities and take the discussion forward. This, as I was saying earlier, all this information is in the annual report, but it isn't listed out as I was saying it right now. These are all inferences and interpretations that you make from the annual report, and something that KCLSU and college are keen on working on, which we will be working on in the coming term, is making college finances digestible for students and addressing the things that students are mainly concerned about, which is where their tuition fees going and what they can expect for their tuition fees. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Vatsav. That's a very detailed yet concise answer, so thank you. The next question is actually for Salma, our president. How do the officers make sure that the money of KCLSU is being spent in line with the interests of students? Salma, over to you.
Sorry, I was just answering on the Vatsav question, but So just to understand it, how do we make sure that we're spending our money correctly? Correct?
In line with the interest of students.
So I think this goes back to who decides how our money is spent. I think that is a better question. Who decides how our money is spent? The trustee board have full oversight of budgets and forecasting, and our trustee board is majority student led. We have 6 officers who are elected by our wonderful student body in February. Nominations are open. Please vote. Please nominate yourself. Please vote. And we also have 4 student trustees who are elected in October. October. Therefore, we have 10 out of 14 trustees are students, and therefore you would hope they understand the student views. And if you feel like your trustees aren't representing your student views, I would recommend yourself that you stand for a position and then vote. As I said, nominations are now open for our roles. You can come and replace me next year. I am so excited to see what you do, and it's having these conversations. If you feel like we aren't doing enough, then you should tell us. If you think that we aren't spending if we're not spending in your interest, that is something we are always open to hearing. What do our students want? Getting involved is the only way to understand getting involved is the only way to actually have a tangible difference rather than and constructively make a difference. So I would really recommend becoming an officer or a trustee because it's a lot of fun and you get to do events like this.
Thanks, Alma. We now have a question for Dennis, our Chief Executive. So the question is, how has COVID affected the union finances and what plans does KCLSU have as to when we could get back on campus?
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very good question. Like COVID has impacted KCLSU like it's impacting the rest of the country in terms of the services that we can provide in line with the restriction that the government has posed. And the biggest restriction that's impacted us is in terms of our commercial operations, being able to operate, as well as the restrictions of movement of students and them coming onto campus. Those factors together has compounded to actually create a great financial loss for us in terms of our commercial income. So that is the financial loss in terms of the way that it's impacted us. But the bigger loss, I think, is more than financial, and it's that community challenge that we've had. Because Students' Union is developed on the foundations of developing a strong community that can work together for the betterment of the students, right? So we have a community engagement team, and by not being in a position to have a physical community has been quite challenging. But the team have been dealing with trying to create a digital community that we can try and use in order for us to best understand what the needs of the students are. So financially, our commercial services, but more holistically, it's the community elements that I think we've missed out on. In regards to the way that we're working to tackle this, the most important thing is just being mindful of the fact that we are bound to what the government put in place in terms of restrictions, but the complexity is that it's not only what the government put in place in restriction, it's the way that the university interpret those restrictions and place that back on us. So the way that we're looking to actually tackle this is, one, by making sure that we have those discussions with the university while protecting our level of independence. Salma sits on the senior management team as an observer, holds the university to account in terms of their decision making and puts forward those points of views. So that's one way of us trying to make sure that we are trying to survive the COVID period. And then the other element in terms of the COVID era is the way that we're engaging more with our students via surveys. Like we're engaging with our students to actually see how they are interacting with COVID and what that means for them. So that's one way that we're doing that. And another way that we're doing that is by making sure that we work in an agile way. One of the things that we realised is that we've been forecasting left, right and centre. We've had a December forecast that now we've had to actually change because of the extended lockdown. So we know that everything that we're doing at the moment, we have to do in a very agile way. And so what we've turned around and said, as opposed to making determined decisions, we just have to go with the flow. And therefore we're working on a dynamic operation model. Where we know for a fact that there's different tiers, and how would we react to those different tiers. So for example, if it goes back to tier 1, we know for a fact that we can have greater numbers of students on campus, we can open up more of our services, and therefore we'll be able to provide a bit more provisions for our students to actually have a bit more community activities in person, whereas in the lockdown element of it is seeing how we can actually create a sense of community, but more importantly, from community, we've seen a bigger shift moving towards making sure that the academic interests of our students are looked after, because that's one of the key points that they've turned around and said that they want us to work on.
Thank you very much, Dennis, and I'd like to thank the whole panel for getting involved in this section. I'd now like to pass back to Dennis, who's our Chief Executive, and he'll be giving a thank you speech to the Board of Trustees.
Thank you so much for that. I think one of the things that we just have to appreciate is that events like the AGM is not an enigma, right? So before I actually go on to thank the Board of the Trustees, I think it's only right that we actually thank the facilitators of today's session, right? And I think that a big shout out to Tanya, as well as to Damien, to Caroline, to Xiao Li, to Sophia, that have worked tirelessly in order to make sure that today's event was a success. So thank you so much, everyone, for the effort and the work that you've actually put in. Equally, at the same time, I do think that Imran and Faizi has done an amazing job today in terms of chairing. These are our students. So if you're talking about the way that the union is actually engaging with our student bodies, empowering them, is by having our activities such as the AGM led by students. And it's so amazing to see Faiza and Imran leading on this as chairs. So a big thanks to them. But then at the same time, when it comes down to the running of the entirety of the organisation, although that responsibility is delegated over to the senior leadership team, the group of people that help the senior leadership team in order to actually make those decisions, hold us to account, and at the same time support us to deliver what our strategy says, what our charitable objective says, is our Board of Trustees. And with our Board of Trustees, we have our 4 student trustees, right, who are absolutely amazing. The students, they are engaging with the union. Carla Tamasan, Yisan are being absolutely amazing in terms of their input. They don't only attend our board meetings, they also take part in our subcommittee session. Then we've got an away day that they're going to be taking part in, helping us decide how we want to work in the future. Equally, I'd also want to actually say thanks to our 4 lay trustees, Laura, Kate, Sonika and Julie, all of whom provide extreme amount of experience that we can lean on to make sure that we're doing things right by our finances, legal compliances, campaigning and business operating, right? And last but not least, I just wanted to actually say a huge thanks over to our sabbatical trustees. You really don't know the challenges of being a sabbatical trustee unless you're a sabbatical officer yourself. You would never know what the challenges are of that. And it's a position where you have to make sure that you've got the best interest of the organisation at heart, while trying to be a representative at the same time. And it's not a very easy balance to get right. But our sabbatical officer team work really hard and have been doing a great job. And I think what really makes it special is that they've been doing this in a very remote way, only because is the sign of the times that we haven't been in a position to be in a place where we can get back to the office physically, and they've done an absolute stellar job. So as a note of thanks, I just want to actually reiterate our thanks over to our organisers for today, to our chairs for today, our student trustees, our lay trustees and our sabbatical trustees. So thank you everyone for all of your work today, and at the same time just reiterating there's a lot more for us to do, and just making sure that we continue at with the momentum that we've already put into place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Just before we go to our head chair, Salma, who's also the president of KCLSU, I just wanted to announce AOB, any other business for this meeting. And it's something that I slipped in before, stating that spring election nominations are now open. So you can nominate yourself for spring elections positions, and it includes the positions of our 6 full-time student officers. So if you're interested, in finding out more and being nominated, head over to www.kclsu.org/elections. And over to Salma. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to our student facilitators who did an amazing job. I could not have done this last year. I really don't know how you did it. You were absolutely amazing. I really appreciate everyone coming. All the staff at KCLSU who made this happen. We had to do it in a digital AGM last year, but I think this year it was much better. And I'm not biased whatsoever. And it's just, moving in a COVID time just shows us how we have to be agile and learn new things, but they're not necessarily bad things. We are moving in a positive direction, and we're hoping that maybe we'll blend some of this in for next year. Who knows? Just making sure that we are always moving positively and forward for our students. I just want to remind everyone now to go vote, and then you might be you might win £150 in our prize draw when you take part in voting. So that is very exciting. Talking about voting, go in spring elections, run, it'll be great. So what I'm going to leave you with is thank you all for supporting us in this wonderful year. Go vote in AGM and also run in elections, because I'm sure you will all be amazing part of our union and you can influence it further. Thank you, and I'm going to close the AGM now.